We start this class by learning about hand sewing because hand sewing is the most basic and low-tech approach in soft fabrication construction. Hand sewing allows you to do fast prototyping by connecting pieces of various materials together. Not only can you connect soft materials to each other, but you can also connect hard materials with soft materials and fragile materials. The flexibility of the thread allows you to easily attach complicated shapes together as well. The next awesome reason to learn hand sewing, and it may not be obvious since we live in a world where clothes are discarded when damaged, but hand sewing is essential for repair work. It is also the backbone of detailed work and decorative embellishments. Some things just can't be done with machines. Evidence shows that early humans have developed the technology of the needle as far back as 60,000 years ago. The need to fasten skins, furs, hides, and bark around the body perhaps arose from living in harsher climates, and the predecessor of the needle was most likely a primitive awl, which at that time was a sharp object that allowed one to poke a large enough opening so that a strip of soft material could pass through. The original threads were animal intestines, tendons, veins, and animal fibers. Eventually, early humans discovered the needles can be made from bones and wood with an opening that would allow the automatic passing of the connecting material. If you live in the western states of United States and take a wilderness survival class, you will learn a Native American technique of emergency sewing. Here we have an image of an agave plant. The dehydrated agave plant offers a perfect needle with plant fibers already attached, which can allow one to make emergency stitching. We have to remember that the first sewing machines did not become popular and accessible for those who had the means to afford them until 1860s. This means that prior to this time, all clothing was fashioned by hand and continued to be fashioned by hand in places where this industrial technology was not adapted. People throughout the world have developed amazing traditions of making clothes, shelter, boats from soft materials using only hand stitching techniques. On this slide, we have an amazing seal intestine parka coat made by native people in 1820s in what is today Alaska. On the right is a kayak made from driftwood and seal skin from 1930s. Here are examples of shelters that utilize stitching from North America and Northern Europe. On the left is a Native American teepee from 1891, and on the right is a Sami lavu from around 1900. Obviously, hand sewing was a lifeline for both shelter and body coverings for millennia, but pure functionality is not what we humans do, and the story of embellishments and function are always intertwined. It is very likely that embroidery, the process of decorating fabric, originally developed out of the need to reinforce cloth. Human desire to communicate status and other social characteristics certainly found embellishment techniques useful. Here's an example of a gorgeous 18th century Moroccan horse cover that is embellished and made stronger with silver thread. In Japan, sashiko stitches are used to both repair and reinforce cloth. The simple running stitches, when applied with care, dedication, and precision, allow one to produce a type of cloth that is stronger than the original and can even resist the hot flames of fire. Here's an example of a 19th century Japanese fireman's coat that utilizes sashiko stitches to produce a beautiful and extremely functional protective covering. Perhaps the best known embroidered piece of fabric in the West is the Bayeux Tapestry, completed around 1077. It depicts events leading to normal conquest of England. The tapestry itself is 230 feet long. Could this be the very first British comic strip? All jokes aside, however, this is an impressive piece of documentary storytelling at a time when most visual imagery was of religious nature. Let's watch a clip from a BBC documentary to understand the vastness of this needlework project and get a glimpse of small details.
This is the Bayeux Tapestry. It was commissioned to celebrate William's conquest of England, and it begins with the events that led up to it. The death of Edward the Confessor, King of England, and the succession of a new king, Harold. It's magical to be taken back 1,000 years in this dark chamber to see history spelt out for you. 70 meters long, right down to the end, right round and the back. And the story very vividly told. But at the same time, along the friezes, top and bottom, wonderfully vivid pictures, some of them of Aesop's fables, some of little stories, some nobody knows what they are. Little details of farming life here, ploughing, sowing, and a man killing birds with a sling. It's not, strictly speaking, a tapestry. It's actually needlework, sewn with wool onto linen.
As you can probably imagine, the Bayeux Tapestry was not created by one artist, but instead by many skilled laborers. And to prove one's skill in needlework in the past, one created samplers, a piece of embroidery that illustrated and summarized one's ability with the needle. The two examples on the slide are probably samplers done by young ladies of the 19th century to show off their skilled handiwork. These embroidery samplers are from 2nd century Peru. Think of them as a sort of resume of needlework skills. The next technique we will be looking at is applique. This technique allows for the attachment of one material to another surface and thus allows for patterning and imagery. Heraldic flags are a good example of the usefulness of this technique because, after all, Photoshop, Illustrator, and large-scale printers were not yet invented. The shapes of fabric are applied, or in other words, sewn onto the backing to create imagery. Typically, it is the edges of the shapes that are sewn. The stitches used may be invisible or may be part of the design. Here's an example of a giant Bhutanese applique scroll that gets unrolled only during a religious holiday. These scrolls are not allowed to be touched by direct sunlight, and as a result are only displayed between 3 and 7:30 a.m. once a year. The scroll is made from silk, and it is utilizing applique technique to make the imagery. Reverse applique is a technique that reveals the layers of fabric, rather than building layers of shapes on the surface. In other words, several layers of fabric are sewn together and cut away to reveal shapes. These shapes' edges are then stitched down. Really impressive reverse applique examples come from Kuna people in Panama. The molas are part of the woman's traditional dress and originally stem from geometric paintings that was done directly on the skin. The molas came into being after European colonization of the region, at which point the fabric replaced body painting. Equally impressive is the imagery produced with the help of reverse applique techniques by the Hmong people in Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, and southern China. Beading is a technique that utilizes thread to attach beads of various origins to a surface. Beading has been used in jewelry as well as object making. Beading has been an integral part of Native American arts since before the colonization, although the glass beads often used today were introduced from Europe. Styles change among different tribes on the East Coast, Great Lakes, Plateau, and Southwest, but beading continues to be a beloved art form. Terry Greaves is a contemporary Native American artist who continues this tradition in her work. Check out her beautifully beaded shoes on the right. Bookbinding is a great example of the use of thread and needle on something other than fabric. Stab binding is an ancient Japanese technique that allows one to bind single pieces of paper and is very popular for making scrapbooks and photo albums. And of course, the latest developments in technology allow one to sew with conductive materials, thus incorporating programmable circuitry into the world of textiles. A great deal of research and development is currently happening with wearable electronics and smart soft materials. And that actually brings me to introduce to you a little bit of information about a new minor at Ideate called Soft Technologies. I will be posting this poster on our class website so you can look at it and read through it. It explains the kinds of classes you would be taking if you were to enroll into this minor. And there's going to be a Soft Technologies info session on September 23rd. And if you are interested, I will provide you with the Zoom link for that. Now let's take a quick overview of the tools and materials typically used for hand sewing. I'm sure you're familiar with sewing needles, but did you know that sewing needles come in tiniest of sizes, curved, and as long as 1 foot? You will be receiving a standard variety pack of sewing needles with your course kit, and that should be more than sufficient for this class. Threads come in spools or in embroidery schemes. Please refer to the link on the class website for a good resource on understanding on how to use the embroidery thread. The next set of tools you may encounter are on this slide. Although you do not have an embroidery hoop in your kit, it is inexpensive, and if you decide to explore embroidery, I highly recommend that you purchase a hoop. The hoop allows to hold the fabric at attention so that you can focus on your needlework. The thimble is a protector for your fingers. You may use it to push the needle through the fabric or to protect the fingers from being poked. The needle threader is a surprisingly helpful tool for passing the thread through the eye of the needle. And who doesn't want to have a fancy pair of scissors? And finally, we come to the overview of the stitches you will be learning in the instructional videos. I will be demonstrating the running stitch, the back stitch, the overcast stitch, and the blanket stitch. I will be providing YouTube links for how to make hem whip stitches and slip stitches. Even though there is no instructional video by me for these 2 last stitches, I want you to follow the videos and complete those samples on your own. And please post all images of completed samplers on Slack. This is how I will be able to track your progress. And this is how everyone in class will be able to stay in touch and keep an eye out on what everyone is doing. All right, now I want to ask you to move on to the instructional videos and start working on your samples. Good luck.